First and foremost, I'm going to say something here which I was going to say that you might not like, but actually I don't think that's the case at all. It's not like I'm saying anything super critical of Japanese people. One thing that you said there is it's very difficult for us. Now, it's very much a part of the Japanese culture and the Japanese psyche. We're going to talk about this a lot later in the course, actually, in terms of culture and cultural dynamics and how that affects the way that you talk and the things that you say. But generally speaking, the Japanese culture really tends to see itself as quite different, I think, from other cultures. There's been a lot of research done on this, incidentally, in terms of what used to be called Nihonjinron. But this kind of sense that we're different, therefore we can't do it. And it's simply not true. There's no for us about it. It's no more difficult for Japanese people than it is for people from any other language, because the truth is all languages are different. They all have things which are extremely different, and they all have things which are more similar. So, and I would also argue that the grammar isn't the exact opposite. Yes, you structure sentences in a different order, but then so does every other language, basically. I mean, there are categories, and certain languages express things in the same order and others don't. But there aren't, it's not such a huge deal. The main thing you've got to think here is your problem is not so much one of Japanese grammar is different, therefore it's hard to get good at English. Your problem is more one of, I am looking at grammar and trying to construct English with grammar. And I am thinking that it is difficult, therefore I am making it difficult. Whereas the reality is, and you've heard me talk about this before, I'm sure, and we're going to talk about it a lot in the course, and I'm going to really show you how to go about doing it as well, is the reality is actually languages aren't really constructed with grammar at all. Yes, there is what we call a grammar, which is kind of the syntax and the rules of a language. But actually what that is language came first, linguists looked at the language, and then they wrote a list of the patterns that they saw. It's not like those patterns came first and language came from those patterns. Native speakers of a language aren't speaking using grammar rules, not most of the time anyway. What we're actually doing is storing larger blocks of language in long-term memory, which are essentially habits. They are language habits. I mean, they are clusters of neurons in the brain that are all fused together like a path. And once they're stored, they just come out without having to use grammar or vocabulary or anything to put them together. And if you are trying to speak by thinking of grammar in your head, you will always be limited by what you can do. You're always going to hit that ceiling where you can't go and can't get any better, because it's a slow way to do it. And the analogy that I always give of this, and that I'll give you later in the course, is of software on your computer. For example, I use video editing software a lot, and you can use every function in that software using the mouse and scrolling around and dropping down a menu and going to a sub menu and another menu and then finding the thing that you want to do. And with practice, you can get quite fast at that. But it is never going to be as fast as using the shortcut keys. If you use Microsoft Word or something, or really anything on the computer, Control-C copies, Control-V pastes. Everybody can use those shortcut keys for copy-paste. It's a billion times faster than going to the menu and highlighting the text, going to the menu, selecting copy, going to the menu, selecting paste. You can get fast at it, but you will never be as fast as with the shortcut keys. And that's essentially what chunks or these language habits are, that allow us to bypass grammar, which of course is like the menu system in the software. So what you need to do first and foremost is stop thinking that it's because you're Japanese and therefore the grammar is different and therefore it's difficult, because you and every other single person from every other country and culture in the world, I mean, everybody here will say the exact same thing. And thinking that is just going to hold you back. And two, stop seeing English as a system of grammar to learn and speak with, because that's limited, and instead start looking at language from a more holistic viewpoint that is as larger pieces of language to learn, to articulate as are, and then just use as are. When you can let go of that, a lot of this overthinking, all of these mental gymnastics start to go away. Of course, there is influence from Japanese into English. The example that I always like to give, that I always trip over and always have to overthink, to the extent where I'm now talking and talking as I try to work out in my head which way around it goes. But in English, we say sooner or later, whereas in Japanese, you switch the order. And I always have to think about this. I always get it wrong because it always feels strange for me to say later or sooner. Also, kare hayakane. Was it? Yeah. So things like that, it's a slightly different problem, but that will also make you overthink and trip you over. But in terms of the grammar, let go of the need to use grammar. You're only at the beginning of the course, so don't worry about this too much for now. Once we get into week 4, I'm really going to break this down, and I'm going to demonstrate how language actually works and how languages are actually structured. And that's pretty universal for all languages. And it's not primarily in terms of grammar rules. Just remember that grammar didn't come first. Language came first, and then people looked at the language and put the grammar on top of it. The traditional method causes a lot of problems, and I hate to say it, but it's especially big of a problem in Asian countries, Japan, Taiwan, Korea in particular, because you guys have just been trained for years to look at grammar, translate, and you've probably been taught as well, and this used to drive me crazy when I taught at schools in Japan, this idea of, oh, if you want to get good at English, just start at the end of the sentence and translate backwards. And it's the worst advice ever, unless, of course, you want to become a professional translator. If you actually want to do anything practical in the language, it's totally useless advice. All it actually does is create bad thinking habits in your head and just make you get confused. So stop thinking about grammar is the quick and dirty, very short answer to this. Yeah, week 4, week 5 are the main 2 weeks on that topic, but it's something which we will do throughout. The other thing I would say is you speak really well, so don't overthink it. And it's kind of putting this out there. It is almost always the case when somebody says, my pronunciation is really bad. I struggle so much with pronunciation. I overthink my pronunciation so much. That person usually has amazing pronunciation. When people say my grammar is so bad and I overthink all my grammar and it's awful, that person usually speaks really, really well. I think we tend to be hypersensitive about these things and believe it to be much worse than it actually is. It kind of goes back to the comment I made to Patricia as well about how it's easy to spot things that we don't understand, not realizing that that's possibly only 1% and actually we're understanding 99%. So just know that you probably don't have as big of a problem with this as you think you do. Cool. All right. Thank you, Minami. That was a good question.